How's it going, guys? It's Tommy from Mars 1000. Today is June 5th, 2020, and we're obviously going to focus on Tropical Storm Cristobal in this video and its potential impacts on the Gulf states, and also discuss about how strong this will exactly be and who will exactly be experience direct impacts from this tropical storm. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe. If you enjoy weather content, make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to share with friends and family who are interested. So let's look at the water vapor imagery of Tropical Storm Cristobal right now, which at this point is currently just north of the Yucatan Peninsula. As yesterday it was moving very slowly, but then it rapidly moved on to the north as this upper level trough came through and pretty much pulled it up towards the north, along with this ridge that's currently located just to the east of it. And now it's moving north at around 12 miles per hour. So it's moving at about average speed you would see for a tropical cyclone. So if we look at it, we obviously see that the rotation is pretty visible in this water vapor imagery. We obviously have that spin, right? You could see the spin towards the southwestern side, and you see the spin as well towards the northeastern side of the storm. And however, you could see that the eye is relatively dry compared to the northeastern part of the storm. And while part of the reason why is due to some of its wind shear it's dealing with from this upper level trough that dropped down through the northern Gulf of Mexico, it's also as a result of just strong winds that are pretty much blowing to the north over this very warm Gulf of Mexico water, which has very high upper ocean heat content. And a lot of that air is currently converging with this upper level trough that's creating a little bit of convection towards the northeastern side as that wind encounters some of that the upper level trough where it has more stable and slightly cooler air behind it. So that's the reason why we're mainly seeing the convection towards the northeastern side of the storm, my bad. And you can see that just to the west of it, you see a lot of dry air as a result of this upper level trough. And the dry air hasn't really entrained this storm yet, because you can see that the storm for Cristobal, for the most part, is pretty much entrained within this bubble of moisture. But you're starting to see that dry air starting to filter into what is the center of circulation as of right now, and expect the dry air to continue to filter in over the next 12 hours as this storm gets closer and closer to this upper level trough where a lot of this dry air is located. And eventually, as it moves up north, it will separate from a lot of this convection that we're seeing just on the northeastern side, and we're gonna start to see potentially Cristobal kind of develop more independently from a lot of this convection over here, which is definitely enhancing a lot of its strength as of right now, as probably the strongest winds are far to the northeast of the center of circulation as of right now. However, that dry air is expected to separate this convection from the center of circulation, and then the lack of wind shear and the warmer than usual water temperatures will allow the center of circulation to really develop independently and really get a focused area of rotation where the winds could definitely increase, which is not good news. And it all depends on how fast the storm moves as it heads into the Gulf Coast. So let's take a look at the current wind field map, and I want to show you guys this because it's quite amazing how large wind field is for tropical storm force winds, despite only being a 40 mile per hour maximum sustained wind storm. And you could see, like, look at that, the wind field is large towards the eastern portion of this storm, which is expected that the largest wind field and the strongest winds are towards the eastern portion of tropical cyclones in the northern hemisphere in the Atlantic. but it's not usual for a tropical storm to have a wind field this big, especially one that's only 40 miles per hour. And the reason for this is obviously because it's somewhat enhanced by this upper level trough that's allowing a lot of convection to develop, a lot of that moisture to rise on the northeastern side, and a lot of convection as a result of that. And it's also because there's a ridge of high pressure pretty much enhancing the winds to the eastern side of it, and this upper level trough pulling this storm to the north is also enhancing that eastern portion of the storm, where the winds on the eastern portion move north, and it's moving along with the tropical storm. So that's the reason why we're experiencing a much larger than usual wind field for tropical storm Cristobal. And that's worrying because that definitely could enhance the storm surge threat along the Gulf Coast, especially if you're on just east of the eyes to the center of circulation. I'm talking about the eastern portion of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. And you could, and proof of this is, look at the how far the tropical storm warnings extend along the Gulf Coast. You see that Cristobal from that is expecting to make landfall right around this area, the most likely scenario. It could easily go west to east, but let's say if it does take that middle track, you see that to the east of it, that those tropical storm warnings extend from Louisiana all the way to the panhandle of Florida as a result of this not only large wind field, but the large span of rain that's gonna pretty much impact a lot of the Gulf states. And if you look at just to the west of where the eye is expecting to make landfall, the tropical storm warnings barely extend and only go to tropical storm watches just to the west of it, only a couple miles to the west of it, which shows that there's going to be like a large wind field. And for those that are not worried about this along the Gulf Coast, like Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, because it won't make landfall in your area, don't take that into consideration much, because the wind field is just going to be so large, it's going to impact a large area despite you being very far from the eye and despite this being a fairly weak storm. So there's going to be a problem for storm surge, especially in the Gulf Coast where they're easily prone to storm surge. So definitely watch out if you're along the Gulf Coast, even if you're going to be far from the center of circulation. So let's currently look at what the computer models are expecting. So let's look at the GFS model, what it's saying. And you're also probably wondering what's the strength forecast of this, and we're going to check out what the GFS model is stating. So this, as of right now, I would say the center of circulation is slightly to the east of this, and obviously to the northwest of it. But this is what the GFS model is expecting, and as you can see, the GFS is expecting this to maybe strengthen a little bit, and then you see that in the later runs it sort of tightens its circulation, as in the earlier forecast you see that circulation is much larger, but as we head more and more into the forecast hour, you see that the circulation sort of gets smaller, which could represent that it's getting a more focused center of circulation, and we might see stronger winds within the eye. And that's not good news for Louisiana, since they may experience a hurricane at landfall if it's able to really get its center of circulation in very strong and in a very small and focused area. However, it all depends on how long it's over water. If it moves slower, it's likely that this could still become a hurricane, despite the forecast still stating that it's likely going to be around 60 mile per hour storm. However, if it moves faster, which is definitely the much preferred forecast, then it's less likely to become a hurricane at that point. And it all depends on this ridge just to the north of it. If the ridge builds faster than we initially expect, then this storm is likely to move slower and potentially grow into a hurricane. But if the ridge doesn't really get as dominant as the current computer models are expecting it to be, then it's less likely that it will have enough time over water to develop into a hurricane. Right now, the computer models are favoring this into only developing this until about a 60-mile-per-hour storm, as National Hurricane Center agrees with this forecast, as it's only going to take around a 60-mile-per-hour storm to make landfall. But I wouldn't rule out the chance that this could develop into a hurricane if it gets enough time over water, because wind shear might not be much of an issue at that point once it moves north to the Gulf. Because if we take a look at the 250 millibar wind speed forecast, you see that the wind shear will be relatively light in this region. So however, the thing that might hinder it as well is dry air. If the dry air wasn't there, then this would easily become a hurricane in my opinion. But it's still going to deal with a lot of dry air that could hinder it from really developing into a hurricane. So let's take a look at the relative humidity forecast that GFS is currently stating. So if we move back, so you can see that this at this point as of right now, you see that the moisture is very elongated, the storm is very elongated, and the center is very elongated, as it's pretty much consumed by this gyre that's in Mexico. And as you can see, as we move forward, you start to see that dry air start to filter in, which will hinder it from really developing rapidly, thankfully. However, it still could develop into a hurricane if it does get enough time over water, but that dry air will hinder it. And as you can see, the moisture that you currently see just to the northeast of it will eventually pretty much break off from the center of circulation and become independent pretty much, and the storm will become independent as it develops more independently, which could mean that the storm's winds will be more focused and that it'll strengthen as a result of that. So we definitely have to see over the next couple of days like if this moves slower or faster. It all depends on this ridge that's going to develop in the over the United States. However, one thing I could say inevitably is that we will see a heavy rain threat that extends pretty much all throughout the Mississippi River Valley. As you can see through a lot of the Mississippi River Valley, around 2 to 4 inches of rain is expected over the next 5 days. And near the New Orleans area and the Mississippi Gulf Coast, 6 to 10 is possible. And even as far east as Florida, where it's going to be far from the center of circulation, you could see 4 to 6 inches of rain and possibly more in localized areas. So the rain threat is definitely going to be huge, and that's all good news, especially for inland in Arkansas and Mississippi, where they've already experienced a wetter than average year, which could enhance the flash flooding risk and flooding in general. So if you're in flood zones, definitely keep in mind all throughout the Gulf Coast, Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Florida. So definitely be aware of that. And as for the storm surge, like I said, just because it is a weak tropical storm does not mean you'll be out of the woods in terms of storm surge, especially in areas where they're very prone to it, because it's going to have a large wind field. And what a large wind field in a tropical cyclone does is that it pretty much extends the amount of time wind could blow over water. And since the wind field is so large, that means the wind's going to have a lot of time to blow over water and pretty much create a high wave and storm surge threat as a result. As you can see from Morgan City to the mouth of Mississippi River, 2 to 4 feet of storm surge is expected, and then 3 to 5 all throughout the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and then 1 to 3 throughout the Florida Panhandle. And it pretty much extends even all the way to Tampa Bay, which is very prone to storm surge flooding. So be aware of that if you're along the coast and prone to storm surge flooding. So that's about it for this video. I thank you guys for watching. For those in the Gulf Coast, if you live in flood zones, whether you're in a river or along coastal region, make sure to watch out. If you're in one of the zones, prepare now, because it seems likely that you will get impacted, whether it is a tropical storm or not, or a hurricane or not, or whether it hits your area directly or not. So definitely prepare along the Gulf Coast and maybe even around the Mississippi Valley as well. As I thank you guys for watching, and I hope you all have a good day.